Okay, let's get some more of this shutter done. Just give that a little smear of molybdenum paste. It fits on the post here. It's got a little spring on the tail of it that needs to tuck down into the case right here. That's seated correctly. The moving flash contact needs to go on top of that. If I cock that action, I can put the top plate on here. This one small screw goes at this end. Whoops. Magnetised screwdriver. Bugger. Get in there. There's a spring that goes here. And the screw is a shoulder screw. The shoulder allows that spring to rotate freely around the screw. I can get the thing in. Some screws are troublesome to handle because, like this one, they've got quite a large head on them. It makes it difficult to get them to sit in position. That's not looking very good. That'll do. That'll do. It's started. I'll just run that screw down lightly. That spring is not seated correctly around it. Tighten up a bit more. Check that the spring is free to move. It is. Tighten that screw down. Tighten the screw at the other end. And the long end of the spring has to come around behind this arm, so I've got to lift that over. Drops down into a notch in the back of this arm here, so that this piece is sprung loaded. Just give this a wipe of molybdenum paste. And the next piece I want to put on is the shutter release, I think. The shutter release arm here. Just a wipe of molybdenum paste right on the shaft of that. That fits in here. You have to make sure that it goes underneath the B lever so that it tends to lift the B lever upwards. And when the shutter is depressed, it allows the B lever to drop. So that spring's tucked in correctly. That seems okay. The main drive cam here. Let's give that a wipe through the centre. Some molybdenum paste, particularly on the long curved edge. and the two surfaces here and here where it picks up the blade actuating ring. Put that round into the park position. And here's the main drive spring. One end of the spring drops down into a hole on the blade actuating ring, on the main drive cam rather. Let's get that in position. There. And the tail I've got to lift around and hook behind there. This is always entertaining when you've got a decent spring because it wants to return to its rest position violently. Now that's lifted out of the hole in the thing. There we go. That's back in place. Let's see if I can get this to go. No. Normally the springs are somewhat more relaxed, and then of course they're easier to deal with. And of course this is all nicely lubricated with molybdenum paste, so it's awkward getting a grip on it. That's it, it's in position. So that's cocked. Let's swing this round to the cocked position. Wow, yeah, that spring's got lots of oomph, lots of power. That works nicely. That shutter certainly fires smoothly. I'm just checking the flash contact here to see how that makes, and to do that I'll cock the shutter, release it, but I'll let that go down very slowly. No, that's making good contact with the flash contact. There's no problem there. I need to clean my retard gear train and my self-timer with delay action. They're soaking here in some naphtha. I'm just going to work the action of those multiple times to flush them out, and I'll blow that excess naphtha off along with any oil and rubbish that it's gathered up, and then lubricate those with some graphite powder when they're clean and dry, and then pop them into the mechanism plate, and I'll bring you back when I'm ready to do that. Before I get carried away in my enthusiasm, I better put the control levers on for the flash sync and the aperture, I suppose. So I'm just putting a touch of molybdenum paste on that detent spring. Here's my flash sync setting lever, self-timer setting lever. I'll put a wipe of molybdenum paste on that little piece there. Drop this in position, making sure that the pin goes behind the spring at this point. That's it there. The shim goes in position here. Does it not want to sit flat? That's better. And the lever that operates the diaphragm for setting the aperture sits on there. It sits on a post on the ring for setting the aperture blades, and there are 3 small screws that hold this all together. I'll just cover that with my fingers so you can't see anything in the traditional fashion. Sorry about that. Check that moves. It's moving. It's a little bit, feels a bit rough. Feels a bit of a dry feeling to it. Let's get the third screw in position and have a look at it. Tighten those 3 screws down. Just check the action. Well, it does have a bit of a rough feel to it. I'm looking at the shape of this lever from the side to see if it shows any signs of being bent. It wants to stick a bit. I'll try a bit of graphite powder first underneath where the heads of those screws are. See if that will help. Just work that in a few times. Yeah, that seems to have fixed it. Blow that excess away. Oh, that's nice and smooth now. That's good. Now back doing what I intended to do before I was so rudely interrupted. I'm going to fit the retard gear train in place. So first I'll cock the shutter, take the retard gear train which I have cleaned in naphtha and lubricated with graphite powder. One screw goes at the end here, the pivot if you like. Making sure this lever is pulled back, pulls back, it runs against a protuberance on the blade actuating ring. And there is one screw here that runs through a hole in the the retard gear train that's oversized, so that you can adjust the position of the retard gear train slightly for greater engagement with the cam by moving it forwards, or by lesser engagement with the cam by moving it away. I'm moving it towards the centre because in this case I know that I have a strong main drive spring and it's probably going to require that in order to give us something like appropriate speed. So the shutter's cocked. We should get something like 1 second if I fire the shutter. That was quite good, and I can see I'm going to have to just change the battery on here, so back shortly. Right, that's good and working correctly. I'll put the self timer in now, delay action. That fits in the body here. Making sure that the pin here comes up through the slot. That's all good. Let's find its retaining screw. Yeah, that appears to run smoothly. Making doubly sure that all the graphite powder has been blown away, any excess. that's good. So our curved cocking rack in there, or cocking gear, needs to go in. I'll just clean that and pop that in place. That's that part, and that part's pretty clean already. One more small piece we need to do this is our little sector gear. Let's get this in place. So this little pinion, I'm just putting a wipe of molybdenum paste on the shaft of that pinion. The pinion drops in here. The tab on the pinion drops into this position against the main cam. This curved, this ring here serves a number of functions, but it's certainly part of the cocking action. I'll get this in position. It's got a hook over that pin there, pulled out, timed correctly. That's right. Just watching the position of the tooth here to make sure that's correct, and that the tab here on the self timer is behind that spot there. That's all good. I'll put the shutter speed cam plate on the top, and I'll just lubricate that very briefly, again with molybdenum paste. This sits on here, and if I put this around to the 1/8 of the second position, we'll cock the shutter and see what it does. I think that's slightly fast. Well, it's not far out. I'll have to check that on the timer and see how close I am. I suspect that's slightly fast. I'm just going to try the self timer with delay action. So I'll cock that. That's running down now. And there you go, you saw it fire the shutter. So that's all good. I need to be sure of my timing, so I'm going to put the front retainer ring on there to stop that speed cam plate getting away. Test this on my shutter speed timer, come back, make an adjustment if I need to. There's two ways you can adjust the speed on here. Oh no, I'm quite confident that's a little bit quick. I'm just going to make an adjustment before I even do that. You do with experience, you can spot when speeds, particularly low speeds, not fast speeds, you can't really tell much about that, but low speeds, with experience you can tell when they are too fast or too slow. That adjustment was pretty much in all the way, so I might not get any joy out of that, but there are two ways to adjust the speeds. And that's the way I would normally adjust it, but you can adjust it by bending out the pin on this arm so that it effectively pushes the arm further out or lets it come back in further, depending on what you're trying to achieve. Right, I'll go and test that and be back. That seems good now. We'll just run it at 1 second, give it the self timer, let it run. Self timer sounds nice and smooth. That sounds good to me. Very good. Just about ready to close this shutter up. I need to clean up a few components yet. The first being the outer case. So I'm wiping that carefully with a bit of naphtha to make sure there's no dried grease or anything in the track, that the curved pusher and the curved cocking rack run in. Because with broad flat surfaces, they could, if there's any grease or gooey stuff in there, it'll create an awful lot of drag and they just won't move smoothly, which can affect a couple of things. It can certainly affect your shutter cocking rack if it requires too much force in order to move them because they're overly sticky. And here I'm just wiping a bit of molybdenum paste on them, and molybdenum paste, you're just leaving a dirty mark really. You don't need to apply lots and lots of it. It's an extremely thin film you're looking for. I'll pop that curved pusher in place and the curved rack. Take my shutter, make sure it's cocked. And swing the case into place. Got to line up the flash contact here. It's not sitting flat. That's better. That's it. The case is correctly positioned. The flash contact is connected. There are 3 screws that go in here. That one with a large head in that position, and that screw, as I've said, is to stop the shutter being able to rotate in the mount. 2 small countersunk head screws. A larger diameter one comes over here. The smaller diameter one goes here. Lift those screws up. Don't overdo it, because if you strip out those tiny screws, it's not good. Just do up that screw on the flash. And that's the back of the shutter dealt with really. The front of the shutter, we can cock it here of course, fire it there. What have I not got in? I haven't got in the lever that blocks the shutter release from being pushed unless the shutter is cocked. So I'll just remove the front retainer, which has to come off anyway. Lift off the speed setting cam. Here is our lever. Get that spring on that position correctly. Hold back that spring so that it will go behind the post. Swing that in position. It's sprung loaded, that's correct. Put the shutter speed setting cam plate in place. Round a little bit further than that. That's better. check that that's seated correctly. That seems good. Now our shutter speed control rings and things for the front. I'll clean those. Alright, let's get this back in place. So the tab on this here needs to go into the fork on the aperture setting at the bottom. These two notches need to line up with this tab and that tab, like that. That's all that's required. This black ring provides us with our aperture settings at the top of the shutter. That couples to a little tab on that ring we've just popped in place. Let's see if that's seated correctly. Doesn't look like it. I think that's okay. Now this front plate, there's notches in here. They act as the detent for the shutter speed settings. I just put a smear of molybdenum paste on those so that they will click nicely. And this plate only fits in one position and sits on a post. That's it there, locked in position. So the front retaining ring can now go in place. That usually screws on fairly easily. It's quite thin. You've got to be careful not to cross thread it. If you take your time, you should be fine. Just checking the action of this, making sure it's not too tight. It feels a little bit severe. Let's back it off to the next position. And there's three positions visible here. I'm going to put the screw in at that position, the locking screw. The little black flat screw that's really keen to get away. And if it does, it's hard to find because it's so small, and being black it doesn't make itself known. That's that. That feels good. You can see one little mark on a shutter blade there. I'm going to see if I can lift that off. No, it doesn't really want to come off. Well, I'll leave that there, I think. I don't think I need to see the back of that too badly. Let's try that again. That's very minor. That's okay. We can deal with a blemish like that. That's not a problem. There's our shutter. I suppose clean and put the lenses back would be a handy thing to do. We've got our front and rear groups. So a quick wipe around the outside of the housing of those lenses with some naphtha, just to remove any dust and dirt or grease. There shouldn't be much, if any. That came off fairly clean, so that's a sign there wasn't much to be cleaned off there. And I'll clean the glass. There's a bit of dust on that inner surface here of the front group. I'm rotating the cotton bud as I go to keep presenting a clean face to the glass, so that if you do pick up a bit of dust or something, you're not grinding it in. Blow the dust off that, line that up, rotate it, it should drop in position. Now that little spring tab probably needs to be pushed down because it's, yeah, let's just see if we can get that locked down in position a bit better. It's reluctant to go. That's better. That's all that's required there. It's just to make sure that the lens isn't unclipped accidentally. The front surface looks very clean. Just do that the same as I did the rear surface. That's good. The rear group, another cotton bud. You can go for a lot of cotton buds doing this, that's fine, use as many as you need, they're as cheap as chips. When I worked for Kodak many years ago, they were doled out like they were gold bars. Yeah. You sort of got 5 at a time and had to make them last all day. I'll just tighten that up. I'll do the same as when I undid it. I'll just put my rule through there. Nip that up. And another cotton bud to do the outside surface. And I can move this lens around so I'm playing the light from the window to my right here over it. I can judge from the reflections how clean it is, whether there's any smearing or anything. That all appears to be very good. I have 2 paper shims which need to be free from the oil that's currently soaking in them, so I'll just clean those. And the paper shims are used to adjust the position of the lens and shutter assembly relative to the film plane. Almost certainly in the factory the lenses and shutter assemblies came complete, possibly direct from the manufacturer of the shutter, Deckel in this case, and they would have been mated up with camera bodies on the assembly line, possibly fairly late in the piece, and using shims, paper shims which are very thin, allowed for fine adjustment of the focus helical already having been set to the appropriate standard on the production line. Just run that retainer ring loosely in place. That shutter assembly is ready to go back on the camera.